I think the mere fact that he spent so much time with you, was willing to, is fascinating in and of itself. And I guess the big question about MBS, which I will refer to him as now, is whether he can deliver on these reforms, these promises of reform and modernization. Like you said, he's pledged to root out corruption, to diversify the Saudi economy away from oil, to curtail the power of religious police, increase women's rights, including the right to drive and wear more modern clothing. So you were in Riyadh, you met with him. I mean, was your impression of him that he's sincere in these pledges? And did you see signs that he's able to deliver or has delivered?
So there's no question in my mind after this most recent conversation at the end of February and the two previous ones that he does have a vision of change, and that he means to bend Saudi Arabia to this idea of a more modern country. I found two things on this trip that encouraged me, and then I'll mention one that worried me. The encouraging things are, first, that these reforms, especially his putsch against corruption, rounding up all these hundreds of billionaire princes and other Saudi notables and putting them in the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh last November, that's been very popular, especially with younger Saudis. I went out in the streets just to talk to Saudi kids, walked into a cafe, don't really think anybody could have stage-managed it, and said, what do you think? What did you think when you saw all these people being hauled to the Ritz-Carlton? And the response from every person I talked to was, we think this is great. One young man said to me, these princes think they're better than us. They think that they're different. Well, they're not. We're all Saudis. The second thing that I found was that there's surprising support for these changes among people in the religious leadership who are close to MBS. I interviewed Sheikh Mohammed Alisa, who is head of the Muslim World League, which is a government-backed organization, but is part of the ulama, the religious leadership. And he was emphatic in saying, we don't see any reason why women shouldn't drive. We don't see any reason why women have to wear a black abaya. We don't see any reason why women have to cover their faces with this niqab, it's called. I found that fascinating. I kept asking him, surely there are some people who are more conservative than you within the ulama. Aren't they concerned? Aren't they upset? The answer is yes. So those two things, I think, public support and surprising support or acceptance from the religious leadership are both very positive. The thing that worries me is that he is, as I wrote this morning, he's a young man trying to do everything at once.
Right.
He's fighting every battle on every front. He's super ambitious. He wants to change everything yesterday. I think anybody who wants that more modern Saudi Arabia has to worry that this young man is taking on more than he can handle.
So the critics of MBS say, the Saudis for a long time have been talking reform, but they don't deliver. They'll sort of point to the fact that, this anti-corruption campaign you talked about, he locked up 381 wealthy Saudis at the Ritz until they repaid $100 billion in restitution. But not long ago, he spent $550 million on a mega yacht that he spotted when he was on vacation. Some of the people he locked up were reportedly tortured. One died. The Saudis still behead and stone people as young as 15 years old as punishment. How do we grade progress made versus the status quo in Saudi Arabia versus the Western standards, which I think we all would say, they're not where we need to be?
Well, Saudi Arabia, like sadly every country in the Middle East, is a long way from where we would think they ought to be in terms of basic human rights, in terms of the structure of their legal system. I do have the feeling that there's been some movement. Mm-hmm. Is it sufficient? No. I asked him when I was interviewing him on February 26th, a month ago. I said that you're coming to the United States. We're concerned in the United States about human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia. Isn't this a good time for you to release some people from prison who are being held, human rights organizations say, for completely spurious 5 names of people who are particularly seen as victims of injustice. And he came back with quite sharp negative response. Our standards are different from yours. We think our standards apply. Every time Americans try to lecture us about human rights, it ends up backfiring. It's the usual response that you get, frankly, in many countries around the world when you raise human rights issues. And he concluded this part of the interview by saying, our feeling is if it isn't broken, don't fix it. So, okay, I took that as a quite sharp negative sign. The interesting part is that before I had, after I'd sent off the interview, but before it had been actually published in the paper, so presumably, there are ways that they knew what I had written. And I'd used that quote about if it isn't broken, don't fix it. I got a call from the palace saying that the Crown Prince thought about that, and he just wanted to make clear that in this area, as in other areas, he would consider making changes where needed. I have no idea what that means,
right,
other than that they're attentive to their image. But I did think it was interesting that they understood that on this question of human rights, they're vulnerable. No country likes to seem as if it's capitulating to American pressure on these issues. I mean, it's one problem with our ritual statements about this, and then we're always surprised when nothing's done.
Yeah.
But they understand it's important. Saudi Arabia needs to be a freer country. Mohammed bin Salman himself is creating expectations among younger Saudis that they're going to live in a freer, more modern place. And this is part of delivering on that. So if he doesn't get that, in the end, he's going to have to deal with the consequences.
Yeah.